Despite their reputation for emotional distance and their ability to seemingly walk away from relationships without looking back, avoidants face a fundamental psychological paradox that makes truly leaving their partners nearly impossible. Their entire defensive system is built around the illusion of independence and self-sufficiency. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lies the same human need for connection and attachment that drives everyone else. The avoidance attachment system doesn't disappear just because they've learned to suppress it. It goes underground, operating below the level of conscious awareness while still influencing their emotions, decisions, and behaviors. When they attempt to leave a meaningful relationship, they're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming that designed humans to form lasting bonds for survival and well-being. This internal conflict creates a state of cognitive dissonance where their conscious mind tells them they're better off alone, while their unconscious attachment system screams that they're making a terrible mistake. The relief they initially feel after leaving, the sense of freedom and restored autonomy, is typically temporary and eventually gives way to a deeper recognition of what they've actually lost. The avoidant discovers that their defensive strategies can protect them from the anxiety of intimacy, but they can't protect them from the emptiness of isolation. They can convince themselves intellectually that they don't need anyone, but they can't convince their nervous system to stop seeking the comfort, understanding, and emotional regulation that came from their partner's presence. This psychological impossibility of complete detachment explains why avoidant departures are rarely permanent. They may physically remove themselves from the relationship, but they remain emotionally tethered to their partner through memories, regrets, and the ongoing recognition that something irreplaceable has been lost. The harder they try to cut these emotional ties, the more they become aware of how strong those connections actually were. The attachment system reactivation cycle. When avoidants initially leave relationships, their attachment system temporarily goes dormant as their nervous system focuses on restoring emotional equilibrium and processing the relief of escaped intimacy. However, this dormancy is not permanent, and their attachment needs inevitably reassert themselves as the immediate anxiety of closeness fades and is replaced by the longer-term pain of disconnection. The reactivation typically follows a predictable pattern. In the first phase, the avoidant experiences relief and validation of their decision to leave. They focus on regaining their independence, enjoying their freedom, and convincing themselves they made the right choice. This phase can last anywhere from days to months, depending on how deeply attached they had become and how overwhelmed their system was at the time of departure. As this relief phase wanes, the avoidant begins to notice the absence of positive aspects of the relationship they had taken for granted. They start missing not just their partner, but the version of themselves that felt safe enough to be authentic and vulnerable. They realize that their partner provided emotional regulation, understanding, and acceptance that they haven't been able to replicate elsewhere. The attachment system fully reactivates when the avoidant faces stress, loneliness, or life challenges that remind them of how much support and comfort their partner provided. During difficult times, they instinctively want to reach out to the person who best understood their struggles and provided the most effective emotional sanctuary. This reactivation often comes with the shocking recognition that they had built their emotional well-being around someone they convinced themselves they didn't need. This cycle repeats because the avoidant never actually resolves the underlying attachment conflict. They simply escape it temporarily. Each time they leave and return, they're essentially pressing a reset button on their anxiety without addressing the root causes of their fear of intimacy. The pattern continues until they either do the internal work necessary to develop secure attachment or lose their partner permanently. The irreplaceable nature of secure-based relationships. One of the primary reasons avoidants can't truly leave certain partners is that these individuals have become what attachment theorists call a secure base, a person who provides safety, comfort, and emotional regulation that becomes foundational to the avoidant's psychological functioning. Once this type of bond is formed, replacing it becomes extraordinarily difficult because it requires finding someone else who can provide the same unique combination of understanding, patience, and acceptance. The partner who becomes a secure base for an avoidant typically possesses specific qualities that address their core attachment wounds. They offer consistency without pressure, understanding without judgment, love without conditions for change. They create emotional safety that allows the avoidant to gradually lower their defenses and experience intimacy without the usual terror of engulfment or loss of self. This secure base relationship becomes neurologically encoded in the avoidant's brain as a source of safety and regulation. Their nervous system learns to associate this person with calm, comfort, and emotional stability. When they attempt to leave, they're not just losing a romantic partner. They're losing their primary source of nervous system regulation and emotional security. The irreplaceable nature of this bond becomes apparent when the avoidant tries to find similar comfort and understanding with other people. They discover that the emotional safety they experienced with their secure base partner was rare and specific to that particular dynamic. Other relationships may provide companionship, attraction, or even love, but they don't offer the same deep sense of being truly known and accepted. This realization often leads to a process where the avoidant compares everyone they meet to their lost, secure base, finding others lacking in the specific qualities that made their original partner feel like home. They begin to understand that what they had wasn't just a relationship. It was a healing environment that allowed them to experience secure attachment, possibly for the first time in their lives. The fantasy versus reality of independence. Avoidants often leave relationships pursuing a fantasy of independence that doesn't match the reality of what isolation actually feels like. Their idealized vision of single life, complete autonomy, freedom from emotional demands, ability to focus solely on their own needs and desires, crashes against the stark reality of loneliness, disconnection, and the absence of meaningful human connection. During the relationship, the avoidant focused primarily on the aspects that felt constraining or overwhelming: their partner's emotional needs, expectations for intimacy, pressure for commitment. They imagined that without these burdens, they would feel lighter, happier, and more authentically themselves. This fantasy sustained them through the difficult decision to leave and the initial period of adjustment. However, the reality of independence often feels nothing like the fantasy they pursued. Instead of liberation, they experience isolation. Instead of lightness, they feel emptiness. Instead of authentic selfhood, they discover that significant parts of their identity were actually developed in relationship with their partner. They realized they weren't just rejecting their partner's neediness, they were rejecting their own need for connection and intimacy. The avoidant discovers that true independence doesn't mean isolation from meaningful relationships. It means having the emotional security to choose connection without fear of losing oneself. They begin to understand that their fantasy of independence was actually a trauma response designed to protect them from the vulnerability of genuine intimacy, not a genuine preference for solitary living. This collision between fantasy and reality often triggers a profound reassessment of what they actually want and need. They recognize that their pursuit of independence was driven more by fear than by authentic desire, and that the relationship they left provided a type of freedom they hadn't appreciated: the freedom to be themselves without judgment or pressure to change. The unfinished business phenomenon. Avoidants struggle to truly leave their partners because most of their departures are motivated by fear rather than genuine incompatibility or loss of love, creating what psychologists call unfinished business. Unresolved feelings, unexplored potential, and incomplete emotional processing that continues to occupy mental and emotional space long after the relationship has officially ended. Unlike breakups that occur due to fundamental incompatibilities, betrayals, or natural evolution apart, avoidant departures typically happen when the relationship is actually going well, but triggering too much attachment anxiety for the avoidant to tolerate. This means they're leaving love, not leaving because love is absent. The unresolved nature of these feelings creates ongoing internal tension that can only be relieved through reconnection or genuine closure. The avoidant is haunted by the sense that they abandoned something meaningful out of fear rather than wisdom, that they chose safety over growth, that they may have thrown away their best chance at genuine love and acceptance. These regrets don't fade with time. They often intensify as the avoidant gains perspective on what they actually lost and why they lost it. This unfinished business manifests as persistent thoughts about their ex-partner, wondering how they're doing, whether they've moved on, whether reconciliation might be possible. The avoidant finds themselves checking social media, asking mutual friends for updates, or finding excuses to reach out under the guise of casual contact. They can't fully let go because the emotional story between them feels incomplete. The phenomenon is particularly powerful because the avoidant knows they didn't leave due to lack of care or compatibility. They left because they couldn't handle the intensity of their own feelings. This self-awareness creates ongoing internal conflict between their fear of intimacy and their recognition that they may have made a mistake driven by anxiety rather than rational assessment, the scarcity principle, and recognition of value. One of the most compelling reasons avoidants return to their partners is the gradual recognition that what they had was rare and valuable, triggering the psychological principle of scarcity, the tendency to place higher value on things that are limited or difficult to obtain. During the relationship, the avoidant often took their partner's love, understanding, and patience for granted because it was consistently available. Only in absence do they begin to understand the true rarity of finding someone who could love them through their emotional unavailability, understand their need for space without taking it personally, and provide acceptance without trying to change their fundamental nature. They discover that most people aren't willing or able to navigate the complexity of loving an avoidant, making their lost partner seem increasingly precious. The avoidant's attempts to replace their relationship typically fail because they are comparing everyone to someone who had developed specialized skills for loving them specifically. New people may be more emotionally available or easier to connect with, but they lack the deep understanding of avoidant psychology that made their original partner feel safe and accepting. This recognition of scarcity often coincides with the avoidant's growing awareness that their attachment issues aren't relationship-specific. They're internal patterns that will emerge with anyone they truly care about. They realize that leaving their current partner won't solve their intimacy problems. It will only force them to face the same challenges with someone who may be less equipped to handle their attachment style. The scarcity principle also applies to the specific type of love their partner offered. The avoidant discovers that unconditional acceptance, patience with their emotional limitations, and willingness to love them at their own pace are extremely rare qualities. They begin to understand that they didn't just lose a relationship. They lost access to a type of love that may never be available to them again, the return patterns and what they reveal. When avoidants do return, and statistics suggest they almost always do in some form, their approach reveals important information about their internal state and the genuine nature of their attachment to their partner. These returns typically follow predictable patterns that demonstrate the depth of their connection despite their defensive behavior. The most common return pattern is the gradual reconnection, where the avoidant slowly rebuilds contact through casual check-ins, shared memories, or requests for friendship. They're testing the waters to see if their partner is still emotionally available and whether reconciliation might be possible without having to face the vulnerability of explicitly asking for another chance. Crisis-driven returns are also frequent, where the avoidant reaches out during periods of stress, illness, or major life changes, when they instinctively turn to the person who provided their most reliable emotional support. These returns reveal that despite their conscious belief in independence, their unconscious mind still associates their ex-partner with safety and comfort. Jealousy-triggered returns occur when the avoidant learns their ex-partner is dating someone new or appears to be moving on successfully. This activates their competitive instincts and forces them to confront the reality that their option to reconcile may be disappearing. The threat of permanent loss often motivates action. They weren't capable of taking when they felt secure about their partner's continued availability. Some avoidants return with genuine recognition of their patterns and commitment to change, having used their time apart to gain insight into their attachment issues and develop better emotional skills. However, many return with the same unresolved fears that drove them away initially, leading to cycles of reconnection and withdrawal until the underlying issues are addressed. These return patterns reveal that the avoidant's departure was rarely about their partner being wrong for them, but about their own inability to tolerate the vulnerability that love requires. Their return demonstrates that the connection was genuine and meaningful, even if they couldn't sustain it without addressing their attachment wounds. Understanding these patterns can help both partners make informed decisions about whether reconciliation is likely to succeed or simply repeat previous cycles of connection and abandonment.